Welcome to a special edition of Indie Talk here at the Dakota, where we are diving into a very interesting story that has taken over North Dakota. The Dunseith Debacle is what we're calling it here at the Dakota.
Yep, we have been following this story along, not as long as some have. We've been a little over a week. We've been diving into this. Earlier this week, we made a trip and we were able to meet the gentleman involved and associated in all this, Mr. Charles Hoefer. We went up and were able to visit the site in Dunseith, and luckily, he's been kind enough to accommodate us and join us for an interview.
Absolutely. So you can catch us Indie Talk live at 8 a.m. on Thursdays, but this is going to be a special series that's going to be coming out over the next couple of weeks, where we are going to be talking the whole story of what's happened in Dunseith and also presenting a lot of evidence, showing the actual factual stuff that you cannot deny has happened there, and a whole bunch of other things. So very exciting, but we are especially excited to have Charles Hoefer with us here today. Charles, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. So it's been a long road for you. Before we jump into the story of everything that's happened, just let us know who you are. You private investigator, all these other things that it seems like maybe you've had to be. Who are you actually?
None of those things by trade, that much I can tell you. So originally grew up on a dirt road in Indiana, and my family is from Elkhart County area. It's also known as the manufactured RV capital of the world. About, I believe, roughly 80% of America's RVs and probably 60% of the world's RVs are made in or in the border counties of Elkhart, Indiana. My family has a couple of interesting backgrounds. On my mom's side, there's actually direct Amish connections. And I have a lot of Amish and Mennonite family on my mom's side. We don't like those types of controversies like this. So it's
Right.
something that has been very unsettling in many ways. Then on my dad's side, he got into a lot of manufacturing and sales initially in industries relating to housing, motorhomes, and RVs. And then starting in the 1980s, he began starting companies. I also have other family members who've been in and around the RV and housing industries for decades. So the specific kind of credibility of the family's background would be through my father. He started Dutchman RV, Four Winds Motorhomes, which is now Thor Motor Coach on the New York Stock Exchange. Dutchman is also under Thor on the stock exchange. He helped start Gulfstream RV in its first year. He started Dutch Housing, Dutch, Four Winds, and Dutchman all became U.S. #1 brands. So housing, motorhomes, and RVs. I sold Dutch to Champion. He then started Hart Housing, which was sold to Forest River and is now under the Berkshire portfolio as Clayton Wakarusa. Tried to sort of retire and got pulled back into the industry by a group of automotive scientists working on new materials research. And from that point, I started to get more directly involved in family projects from 2002 to 2005. I helped start a company called Pilgrim International, both while I was in school and was putting an enormous amount of time in with the company as well. And they got, by my last year, I think they were exceeding 5,000 units in production. And before the recession, they'd built close to 30,000. So it was another manufacturer that was climbing high. Didn't make it through the recession. My father had a small minority share of the company, but was the only shareholder who tried to guarantee all of the company's credit lines in order to save 300 jobs. And that took a lot of his finances with him when they didn't make it through 08, which about half the industry didn't make it through 08. So then after that, from '05 to 2010, finished college, started a professional cycling event that was a top 20 or 25 event on the national racing calendar for the US, working with the Olympic Center. Helped build a water park in Indiana, which was called the Splash House Water Park. It was municipally owned,
Oh, wow.
and they had torn down a wire factory that was about 200,000 square feet on a 25-acre plot, reclaimed it, and basically turned a brownfield into an award-winning redevelopment.
Wow.
They completely operationally failed within the first 2 years, and when I came in, I spent 2 years with it and got it profitable, and built the second phase of the park, which was the largest surfable wave pool in the Midwest United States, right out of college. Then I was asked to try and operationally save a new project that a group of investors and my father had put together to build the world's first, or North America's first, completely wood-free RV running down a conventional production line. It was an incredibly, I'll call it a diabolically complicated manufacturing process. But it absolutely bit the bug on me because I saw what it did with consumers in the industry. And by 2012, 2013, I started my own project designing the world's first carbon fiber RV. And then had taken my first and only Chinese investment after they wanted me to move to China and I wanted to stay in Indiana. I split with my family, and since 2014, I've been running the Hofer project. I have a lot of family connections in Southern Africa, and we set up a research plant there where we could afford all of the development, working on basically taking aerospace technologies and simplifying it so that you can do a high-speed production rate with a fuselage assembly type concept to build an RV. So it was years of panel and materials development with over 100 global suppliers. Once we got the panel production process down, then we had to figure out how to build the units and actually assemble, which required completely new methods. And so we tested and validated a number of units. And then by beginning of 2021, we were looking for a US production site. And that's what brings us to the present.
That's incredible.
So, obviously, your father being who he was in the industry, you were around RVs since you were little. But what specifically drew you to wanting to manufacture RVs? If there is one
out
thing
of that industry, yeah. So in 2003 and four, particularly, and into the beginning of 2005, when I stopped in the Pilgrim project, I was dealing extensively with the company's retail customers. Was also working shows and doing a little bit of rep work throughout the Northeast. The It was shocking to me how, customers had my cell phone and they would call me in tears because something was falling apart on the unit and they
sure.
didn't feel like they were getting the help that they needed. And I told my dad, this is just bordering unethical. And he said, son, we're doing it better than anybody else. That's why the orders are coming here. And he said, why do you think I'm working in the background on trying to do it differently? I mean, he would have coasted through the 2008 recession if he hadn't put so many millions of dollars into trying to develop plastic materials. And some of the materials today in the industry that replace gluon plywood were pioneered by my father and his supplier group that came out of the auto industry. And so watching what he was trying to do and then seeing how customers just hated it. And then when I tried to help salvage for them a product that was called Earthbound, which had won so many awards, it had been pre-sold at retail for as many as you could possibly build, but they were losing like close to 20 grand for every unit they built. I mean, it was cheaper not to build than it was to build.
Yeah, at that point.
And the concept that customers loved is here's an RV that has no chemical outgassing, no rot, and no mold. And the concept of it was great. Forest River put what we believe is close to 10 million into a plant they called Aviator and tried to go after it. And theirs fell on its face faster than my dad's did, with a lot more cash burned. And the issue that you had is the Elkhart workforce. They know how to do something really well, which is the old stick and tin or the conventional laminated, slap it together, kick it out the door, and we call it same box, different sticker.
Sure.
That's the way things get built there, and they get built by the tens of thousands with that method. You can have axles, off center by an inch. No one cares. It just goes out the door. And so customers have endless problems when they're running their products. And seeing that there was a way to do it differently, even though I would have approached it from a totally different angle, it just showed me, and I had different customers, even owners of the Earthbound, who just said, if there's any way you can continue what had been started and actually get it right, you'll have the future of the market. And so that became kind of my mission was, okay, you cannot approach a more expensive and more complicated material set by doubling the parts compared to a traditional RV and then hoping you can somehow fit it all together at a reasonable cost. It's just impossible.
Right.
And so what we worked on instead was, how do you take all this expensive material and simplify the manufacture and simplify the build, but achieve your core objectives, which is remove all the chemicals, remove all the rot, and then add a few more objectives, which is let's take hail, 4-inch hail. Let's just take it for life. And let's add some durability features and longevity features that other RVs just can't have. And then eventually force change on the industry so that all consumers benefit. So that's been my mission that I've been carrying forward through this whole process of building.
Yeah, building a modernized RV. That's incredible, the path that you've gone.
All right, so Charles, we can kind of wrap back up now. So we're back to today. We're 2 years ago now at this point, 2.5 years. So you're looking for a site back in the States. How do you find Dunseith? Do you go out in search of it, or do they come and find you?
Yeah, so we did a couple of things. One was just worked with some realtor friends and stayed close to home, knowing that we needed to be outside of the Elkhart radius. And that would have been a strategy principally just involving taking what you would call basically kits or nearly complete product, and then just doing some final work and test and getting them into the market initially that way. The other alternate was to find a large facility where you could grab workforce affordably or cost effectively and move forward. In the US, especially in that COVID era, it was harder to even consider workforces. The RV industry couldn't find a workforce itself. They were swelled out their britches. And so we put some feelers out to, I'd say between probably 18 to 20 different states, mostly through their commerce teams, just saying, hey, here's what we're looking at. Do you have sites that might fit? And that was how, North Dakota came on the radar. I think discussions just at a preliminary level probably started around December 2020, January 2021. We started to solicit some proposals, and the Dunseith building, I specifically remember the proposal was very short, but it was intriguing. It was, hey, we've got this 100,000 square foot plant with something, I believe they talked about a workforce that had been recent within a few years, and that, it could be rent free for 3 years.
Okay.
And so I started asking Commerce more about that. And they started telling me more, and it wasn't long before we had meetings arranged with the locals, and the offer changed. We were told, no, you have to buy the building. A state official came and spent time with us at the site and walked us through its history. Kind of some of the first missteps were made by officials at that point, where what was represented turned out to be very far from what actually had occurred.
Sure.
But it was a building that, had it gone through one more winter under city control, you would have been better off tearing it out and scrapping it.
Wow.
It was really starting to deteriorate fast, and it had suffered from basically no maintenance since 2016. By the end of the year, they had cut off the maintenance bills and were just running minimum heat. And by the time we saw it, it had developed very intrusive mold issues. Things throughout the facility had begun to corrode over. Most of the furniture was already unusable. And just rooms and drywall, ceilings, everything needed to be gutted and torn, and in some areas all the way to the exterior siding to start over. So there was a huge remediation work, and we later found out that there had been a sewer flood through the building that the city discovered when the water was running out to the street.
Of course.
And that was allowed to air dry. And that explained why all the carpets through the facility had actually developed a serious rot, even plastic fibered carpets. And we were trying to figure out what happened. I mean, so basically it was a combination of no maintenance and then an inability to maintain, intervene, and remediate that caused the facility to get to a near teardown. Where the attraction was for us was the construction spec of the building was phenomenal.
Right.
It had a double roof across the 50,000 square foot north section, which is a $1.5 to $2 million upgrade.
Wow.
It had over $1 million of what's called HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment that had been left attached to the facility. It was all inoperable, but for under 150 grand, we were able to get it all operable again.
Wow.
And it had compressors and air lines that were corroded through the lines and leaking oil in the compressors. But once you got all that working and you did the remediation work, you had 200 grand of equipment for not very much money.
Right.
And the building had extra thick walls because of its electronics heyday. And we use a lot of glues and resins. And so temperature control is a big thing. And this facility is easily 3 to 4 times more energy efficient than any other building we would have found if we just drew a line across the country from Indiana and headed north.
Right.
So that was, I mean, it was a gem of a find. And then we were really sold, and this has turned out to be true with all the workforce that we've interacted with to date, is the workers from the Belcourt area connected to the Turtle Mountain Tribe are incredible workers.
Okay.
And very hardworking. And you do have a competitive cost advantage because most of your labor that benefits from the IHS health system does not want your private payer health plan.
Sure.
And I'm probably giving up a little cost strategy here, but since they don't, you can pay more and you still save money.
Yeah.
Because it counts as a private insurer head count if someone has access to IHS but says no. So you don't have to pay for the plan. You pay a little better cash wage, but you're saving having to pay the plans.
Yeah.
So if 70% of your workforce benefits that way, then you can be an incredibly well-paying employer, get very loyal workers, and you can save costs compared to about any other place in the country. So for all those reasons, North Dakota started to elevate very, very quickly. It wasn't the highest incentive package. I mean, we did not disperse any grants.
Right.
And the rest of the incentives that were promised have been pulled back since we started finding issues with the site.
Sure.
So, we just loaned our way into this, public and private, and just set up our own financial structure. And it was worthwhile, we thought, because this gives us room to grow. There's lots of farmland around, ways to start expanding facilities. And in our industry, a site this size, I mean, it's a 10-acre complex with a 100,000 square foot building on it. And in our industry, we consider that to be a starter site.
Wow.
And we felt that there's enough workforce here that we could build several more of these plants right around the area and not worry about running out of workers. So that was the draw and the whole reason we came.
Yeah. And when did you guys actually like purchase the building and get started in North Dakota?
On the ground with eyes in August and September of 2021.
Okay.
Did an application. We helped the city of Dunseith do an application to the federal EDA, Economic Development Agency, to discharge the federal liens that were held against the site
Okay.
so that we could repurpose it to RVs. That was achieved, I believe, in October of 2021. Purchase agreement in November. I did a final test on all the systems through the winter that year, paid the city for all their maintenance costs, and just ran a ton of heat through the building to see if it was as efficient as it looked like it was, and it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then took control of the site in February and bought it. I believe it was on April 19th of 2022.
And that was
Start.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that was an exciting day. That like things were about to start trending upwards for you in this project that you're working on.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, we were excited, and we immediately started an employment group at the beginning of April once we had control of the site, got all the locks and everything changed out, and we had to just gut and tear and rebuild all of its systems and remove all the hazards, electrical and otherwise. And it was an exciting project. I mean, we anticipated that by the end of the year, we were going to have our lines up, and we were easily on path for that.
So you had a lot of involvement with the city of Dunseith in this. What was some of the incentives that were offered, not maybe just from them, but also from the Department of Commerce? So obviously you mentioned 3 years of not having to pay any kind of rent.
Which got changed. That got withdrawn.
Yep.
That got withdrawn, and I was then told you have to buy the building, and at first the price was $2 million, and I said, I've got a couple million worth of reno work on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no way I'm paying a price for that when I can go in the Rust Belt and get a building for $2 million all day long.
Mm-hmm.
So then they made the price $525,000, and at that point, you couldn't really turn it down. They met with the Bank of North Dakota. The Bank of North Dakota said that they would readily count that as a community match, meaning like the city was putting the building in, anticipating that, arguably at that point, the price is sort of whatever anyone's willing to pay because they had put it in a pretty sorry state. But once we worked on it, then it was, rapidly a different property. I mean, today we have to insure it for $10 million.
Wow.
Exactly.
For replacement cost. And so the concept that had been structured and what we had been brought in by Commerce in Bismarck and here at the plant, different meetings where they promised us that we would have a Bank of North Dakota supported PACE loan, which gives you, at the time it would have been 1 or 2% interest because the interest rates were already low.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it would have been a private bank led deal, which we had a bank that was willing to do it. Then a commerce loan, which was a credit line actually, and it was subordinated to our other lenders just for general working capital at $2.25 million.
Okay.
Which just required us to request disbursements, and then that loan kind of became a weapon where in order to get the money, it was like you have to do things our way, cleaning up the site, but without them telling us that they knew about it all.
Sure.
So then there were a few other local EDCs and regional planning group that contributed some loans, again, all just subordinated, relatively low interest loans, but all loans that I was personally guaranteeing.
Okay.
And then we had private lenders that were stepping in with us. And then as a family, we'd already put quite a bit of money into the project and have continued to do so to keep it sustaining while we've been working through these issues. So, in total, between here and the overseas side, we would have been looking at around a $5.5 to $6 million total expenditure within a 2-year period of including what we had spent during our development phase. And we thought that if we were efficient, we could probably save $1 million off of that. To date, in North Dakota, we only got about $1.5 million into our spend when we started to run into issues.
Wow.
And then it's been issues ever since. And so we've had to spend, since the point of discovering issues, we've had to spend over $2 million.
Right.
And have not been able to, fully install all the machinery and inventory we needed, because we've been also having to address our monthly overheads
Yeah.
to stay solvent with the lights on and bills paid, while we worked through all the issues with it for the longest time, having an indeterminate amount of time for knowing when we'd be able to fully use the site for what it's supposed to be, which is an RV factory.
Yep.
Without any associated risk. Go ahead.
So coming in there, this clearly sounds like a dilapidated building that hadn't had any kind of work been done to it, or any kind of work being done in it for some time. And that's what you were told as well, correct?
I was told that this group that was called Chiptronics, which used to be the Native American-owned sales entity attached to the manufacturer. So the manufacturer would have 150 to 200 employees. The sales entity would have 5, and they would hold contracts for the site. I was told that that group had tried some commercial projects with IBM, things that were like server related, and that by 2017 it was drying up, and they stopped in 2018.
Okay.
I was told that both by Dave Lehman with the Department of Commerce in different ways. He specifically said that all the aerospace and defense work had been scrubbed out of the site in 2015. Nothing like that ever continued. And he told me that they just tried their hands at some commercial stuff, and it all failed. There was obviously my minor remnants of a tenant that I knew was like a year or two before me that had tried armored vehicles. And what I saw paperwork that noted that they were simultaneously working on a flooring solutions company, an armored vehicle company, and also wanted to grow something related to either CBD processing or hemp in the north side of the plant, which used to be the government-controlled clean room area.
Okay.
For electronics. And so they had these 3 projects evidenced by some paperwork that was left behind on desks. And I asked about them, and I was told that they were just basically grant hunting shysters in a fly-by-night group, both from the state and the community. And it didn't sound like anything to question, because I'd toured other facilities before where, it's, been abruptly locked out. And so you see some mild remnants of property. Now, I did not know that there were deeply personal belongings left behind that were hidden at the site, nor did I know about, you tipped off earlier that there would be a bloody room concealed at the site, nor did I know that there were a couple $100,000 of assets that were abandoned.
Right.
I was also told that the group was a non-payer, and at the time I didn't know that the group was actually prepaid at the point that they left.
Wow.
So there were some very concerning things that I pieced together over the course of a year.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's for later on, I think.
So let's start jumping into that. You get there April of 2022, where you're actually beginning able to start doing work in the building. What was and this is a leading question, but
Okay, go ahead.
how supportive was the city of Dunseith as you started to get going there? Were they complimentary to that, trying to get people to help you? What happened there?
Well, everybody at the city level, at the state level, the regional level was genuinely incredibly supportive. The school had approached us through Dave Scholl, superintendent. He asked if he could use our name to apply for a multi-million-dollar grant for the school's CTE program.
Wow.
Told us about this program they were doing and wanted to make it an RV technical center that could assist us. And I said, well, our industry is pushing for things like this. They've just created a centralized training program. I believe the curriculum was designed with Ohio State. and it was basically a technical college level skills program. And with our industry, we agreed that Dunseith could be the first high school to receive the program in the country because it had been set up by private institutions. It had been set up through technical colleges. It hadn't been set up with a high school program yet. So that very early, I believe around May, was already promoted both through our industry and through the state. And there were promises to launch that by January of 2023 at the school once they finished the new CTE center. They were going to do a whole program, but they were going to start the classwork at the original high school starting in January of 23. And we said that we would pay an extra $2 an hour for any student who completed the level 2 portion of an RV technician program.
Sure.
So, we saw tons of community support, met lots of people. Since 2021, we'd been introduced to what was described to us as a local community leader, Bill Tuttle. And he has a very large family in the area through marriage. And he had been paid by the city of Dunseith to help represent the site through the sale. Dave Lehman from Commerce also assisted in providing info on the site and helping broker the site with the city and structuring the loans necessary to make the project work up here. And then, different city officials and lenders that were brought to us had all recommended that we hire Bill and bring him into the operation. And that was kind of where one of the initially, you have to look back and wonder why, because we later found out that they had defaulted Bill off the site in 2019 for a government flight sensor program that ended with a bloody room. And so we also found out that various aspects of those activities remained ongoing in the community and using our site in various ways without our knowledge or authorization. And then once we figured it out, trying to still hijack the address and tie the activities to our site.
Wow.
So, the introduction of Bill, I would say some people probably genuinely were very deceived. At the local level, he may have been leapfrogging and doing a lot of work more with high-level state and federal officials.
Sure.
That's been hinted at. It's clearly demonstrated in records. It's also very clear by records that we discovered that he told the local city that he had no assets in 2019 when they defaulted him, and it looks like he had substantial amounts of cash.
Wow.
Based on a second set of records we found, and payments he was making to himself that he left at the site. So it was, he became a close family friend for close to, 6-8 months, and was helping to network us. And it became very strange by April because we had met with this high school's CTE program, and we were told that we would have 20 or 30 applications from students from the head of the CTE.
Fantastic.
And the career coordinator. And then Bill had also introduced us to about 31 community members, I think, in a meeting that he organized at the plant. And they all said they would bring their families. And as soon as we said we're hiring, we received no applicants. And Bill said that nothing came from the school. We later found out that the school had given Bill over 20 applications and he made them disappear. He brought only his family members, some of whom were very hard workers, but some of whom he was paying for work on the flight sensor work.
Okay. So through your company, through your company, he's paying for work on flight sensors.
So he's getting on our payroll, having workers on our payroll, and then he's using this legally dissolved entity, Chiptronics, which is a sham entity, and he still has an open bank account with US Bank, and he's paying up to $200 an hour for work on flight sensors.
Okay.
Nice. So he has an unlimited bankroll through your company.
For trips that he's also charging us for.
Wow. That's crazy.
And so just a little context here. The building was around Dunseith for 30 plus years. The longest time it was owned by a company called Benchmark Electronics. They were a developer of different kinds of electronics, whether it be for aviation, going to Honeywell, and also some kinds of different defense contracting. To briefly summarize Benchmark.
Yeah, they had a large commercial division which did things for like Tenant, IBM, everything from vacuum cleaners to security detectors to computer servers. And then they had a defense side, which was primarily Honeywell, but then either through Honeywell or direct through other relationships, Airbus, Lockheed, and Boeing. And that side specialized in some of the most sensitive electronic sensors in government, and also some of the most sensitive commercial sensors in civil aviation.
And this Benchmark Electronics used this other company, Chiptronics, as its distributor.
So
at least at one
was
point.
Always the sales entity for primarily government contracts or commercial work that required minority contracting.
Okay.
They could get preferential contracts, and that's why they were connected to the site. The ownership was independent, and it was supposed to be very much, based from the Turtle Mountain tribe originally in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
They actually had a large board, a large pool of ownership. They had a lot of involvement where the tribal members who were part of the Chiptronics board actually got to discuss and influence hiring and manufacturing by the main plant. By the time Benchmark acquired the operation, it was a Bill Tuttle operation who himself was not tribal, and he had a relative and a friend in the ownership, and that was about it.
Okay.
Do you know what year? And I understand that Bill Tuttle is not the focal point of the story, but I feel like he ties a lot together.
Bill's a linking person.
Yeah.
He's a person who ties into very high-level state officials because he was the sales manager of a very important site, and he had relationships with people across the state and federal government, state government, throughout the defense industry across the country. And then he had the local workforce and he had the connections. I mean, honestly, if he had simply just followed a few rules, I think that he could have rebuilt the plant. But chose not to, and it appears that there was a strong incentive not to.
Very good. And so he was involved all the way back 2015 and before with Benchmark.
It's since the 90s.
Since the 90s.
Sure.
Very good.
Yeah. On the Chiptronics side since about 99 or 2000. So he wasn't actually involved in the manufacturing. He was just printing shipping labels and sticking them on boxes and collecting purchase orders.
Sending everything around for him.
So,
and his company was registered with the Department of Defense as a sales company. It never transitioned to a manufacturing company until he dissolved the defense registration in 2022.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And
so the building history for forever, it's Benchmark Chiptronics 2015. That ends. It's an empty building somewhere before 2020, 2017, 2018, maybe timeframe. There's a other company that's in there for a very short time, which I know that there's a decent amount to talk about there. And that's basically where we're at in the story that I think we need to dig into now. Yeah. So that's just the history of the building so far. So dive into it there, Tyler.
Yeah. So with Chiptronics going there, what they weren't supposed to be operating any kind of manufacturing out of there, at least at first, correct?
All the sensitive work and all the government work and all the aerospace work, at the point Benchmark tore down its NADCAP qualified lines, which is the National Aerospace and Defense Accreditation Program.
Sure.
Once Benchmark tore all that down and tore out the environmental control systems, the humidity controls, and started just leaving live wires all over the facility. I mean, at that point, if Bill wanted to do manufacturing, he needs to qualify a new entity and he needs to qualify lines and processes and start all over.
Without a doubt.
And it appears that was very clearly the intent, that there would be a high bar to set for a group that wants to come in and take this site and compete again with what it used to do. It appears that there was a deliberate attempt to make sure that would be a difficult task.
So what do you believe, before we get to that, what was Chiptronics supposed to be doing there then? Because they were still leasing the building from the city, at least for a short period of time.
There's records of like 7 different lease amendments that I can find. And then by 2020, they just started leasing a small section of the facility to Bill personally,
Perfect.
based on city records I've dug back into now. But yeah, they gave about 30,000 square feet of the old inventory cage areas to Chiptronics for leasing. And now that I've done a deep dive into old municipal records and
For sure.
things, it's obvious that they tried to manufacture, but they promoted a smattering of projects. I mean, everything from plasma machines, basically cutting metal parts, to defense work, to aerospace work, to plumbing company. There's a witness who points to a record that I've seen in the meeting minutes with Bill and various officials that points to an individual connected to a Chinese company that they were trying to recruit to the site. They appeared to be, even at one point, there's mention of a daycare that's being considered. So they were looking at all sorts of projects, actually attempting all sorts of projects, and eventually used it extensively for county storage, both for local businesses and housing authority. But then during that entire time, they were still keeping B-52 bomber files on the site and guided multiple launch rocket system parts on the site, which is the #1 missile bought by the Army, and running a program for the Honeywell GG1320 digital ring laser gyroscope flight sensors.
And you have a fair bit of proof of this too.
Yes, we do.
Without a doubt.
You guys have walked through bits of it that I'm comfortable to disclose.
Fair.
I mean, where you actually see evidence receipts that the military has accepted that this is true.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. So you I guess let's go back to 2022. You and Charles, all of a sudden, now that you're starting to have your renovations take place and you're starting to be more involved in the day-to-day aspect, you're starting to notice some things come up with him, and so there's some inconsistencies that happen, and that's when you notice the payments to the other employees for different whatever they might be working on.
I haven't gone into the specifics of what we noticed with
let's start there.
anyone else yet. I think maybe that's a good place to point out, because I was planning to travel extensively with our supply chain to make sure that all of our suppliers had all their products ready to go to deliver into this factory, some of which were very unique and required a little extra attention. So I believe that Bill was counting on me leaving as well.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly whether he planned to just dump and empty the building or tank the operation or both. But he was going to basically be like a temporary site manager, bring on the workforce. And then we had a separate engineer offsite who was putting him under what we call a project tracker, where everybody's labor hours across any hire that we had were broken out to 15-minute intervals to make sure that all work that needed to be completed was completed, and he was supposed to oversee implementation of the tracker on site. Basically, a really easy way to ease him into any form of a supervisory position where he pretty much has keys to the building, he's opening and closing, and he's telling everybody, okay, here's the workflow the company is assigned, here's your different projects for the day. It's literally written out for him. And then people just get to it and get their work done. So that was the initial approach to getting the site readied and renovated. And in April, within the first week of April, something very strange had happened where I should backtrack actually. In February, the city was clearing out a couple of junk machines. They basically sold about 10 remaining machines for scrap for about $20,000. And the gentleman who was tearing it all out, Bill was assisting. And Bill pulled me to the side one day and said, there's these 2 pumps that aren't part of the sale, and they're each worth $3,000 on eBay. Can I have them? And I said, Bill, anything that's not part of this sale is already under the control of our company. We've already taken full custody of the building. These are not, going to you. And 3 weeks later, the pumps disappeared.
Interesting.
So he asserted that the other company took it. I called the other company. They asserted that they didn't even know the pumps existed, or they would have asked for them.
Wow.
So that was an odd one. And I had also found in 2021, I had been on the site, and then a few weeks later I came, and I knew there was a giant sandbelt machine that was missing. And I could see on the floor where there's different colors in the concrete where it was gone.
Sure.
And ironically, they had a popcorn machine labeled Benchmark from another company called Benchmark that made a popcorn machine, and that had disappeared. And then I found a couple $1,000s of tool and safety gear that I'd seen disappear out of a section of a maintenance room. And when I questioned the city on it, they said, so many keys have been distributed, no one even knows what's what. The part that I had found odd about it at the time was that Bill and I were the only two that had the security code at that point.
Okay.
Because they had reset the code to try and stop theft. Now, I later found out, and Bill showed me, that, well, you can just walk through a whole section of the building through the east side because the alarm system wasn't functional.
Okay.
And so it was obvious that anybody who had a key could get in, and it was impossible at that point to pin a suspect. Which was why I was interested in getting control of the building even ahead of the purchase and
For sure.
starting to change locks and get things set, because I wanted to make sure there wouldn't be additional theft. So with the pumps, I was suspicious, but there was no way that I could really determine who it was. We get to April, and in the first week, Bill calls me and wants to get this guy to pick up his stuff. And I'm thinking, we need to have a discussion here. And so he actually gets angry at me because he had promised somebody with one of the failed businesses at the site that all of those items could go back. And he didn't tell me about this promise when I executed the purchase agreement to take over the site. And he had, on his own, taken a couple of our workers and spent half a day neatly packaging up all of these items. And then I got cursed at up and down by the guy when I told him that he wasn't collecting these items.
Right.
And then I basically said, well, you're going to at least have to pay for labor. And that ended up in just a blow up of an argument. Bill got nearly red in the face and almost started to shake. He was so mad. And I think he was testing me to see how easy would it be to walk things out under my nose.
Okay.
So I chose not to leave the site at that point because I thought, I don't know if this guy's the right guy.
Right.
And so I told him that. I said, Bill, I said, you are on probation here, and we need to see that this is going to work out. Fast forward a couple of weeks, he just starts disappearing to Minot constantly. And I can't keep him on site. I mean, at least 2 days a week, he says he has to go pick up equipment. And when he goes, he's gone for hours.
Wow.
And we're finding this very odd. And we can't stop it. And then we have another project for the security system. And he brings a contractor that's pretty skilled at what they do. And they say that they'll bring a team of 6 laborers and they'll take care of everything for us. Sorry, I'll make sure that ringer is turned up for you guys on the side here. Yeah, so then that should be better. So the security system, we start tearing it off the building, the old one, because it truly was a wreck. And this contractor quotes to come and do a new job. And this is all brought through Bill. Then about that time, a former engineer of the old Benchmark operation, who was one of the head manufacturing people for the engineering side, he had offered to come in, and we're into kind of towards late May, mid-May, when we announced to Bill that he's coming.
Sure.
And a few days later, Bill comes to me, and he has this wild look in his face, and he says, we have to call Benchmark. There's ITAR in here. And ITAR stands for International Traffic in Arms. It's regulated and sensitive componentry. In reality, there was stuff beyond ITAR in sensitivity level, most likely. Some of it we later found was labeled arms export control. But when Bill said that, I said, Bill, if you can show me one thing that's ITAR, you've told me the building's empty, the state told me the building's empty, I can't find anything in this building, and I'm being told by the city the building was empty. If there is even anything that you think is at a controlled level that I need to elevate to someone's attention, you show me, and I'll take it to authorities and we'll get the matter sorted. And then he shook his head and said, I think there is. And I never heard from him again on it. And
Interesting.
that
That was in
was
May.
about the same time. Go ahead.
And just saying, to clarify, that was in May of 2022.
May of 2022.
Okay.
And so I found it an odd interaction, but it didn't raise alarm bells because I said, show me anything that is here. And he had been hiding things with other people very, very carefully through the building. Even as we were starting tear out and renovations, they were moving and shuffling things about through the facility. So it was about that time when we discovered that this group for the Armored Vehicle Project had left more than what we realized they left behind. Within the first few weeks of clearing out the place in April, we find in the corner of an office underneath this blanket is their travel suitcases with all their toiletries and emptied wallets inside and a couple of blank cell phones. And we couldn't yet identify even who it belonged to. And then we found cowboy boots and very personal possessions that you wouldn't think a Texan would leave behind. And there was even an old photo album that looked to go through the early 1900s and into the mid 1900s. And that was when we asked additional questions to Dave Lehman, additional questions to the city. We were told the group was non-payers and they were locked out from a house that was provided to them by the city. It was true that they were provided a house. It was true that eventually the city won a court case alleging that they owed money. However, the city waited a year to bring that case forward from the time that they disappeared to the time that they alleged they owed money, because it took a year to even accrue a $27,000 bill against this company.
Wow.
And then a truck that was worth over $200,000 by accounts of people who've seen it firsthand or been involved in that project was promoted as a used pickup in the newspaper and was sold for, I think, under $10,000.
That's insane.
So the discovery of the possessions I found very concerning, but I also knew, okay, people do get locked out for not paying. And so I have some photos of some of what was discovered, and then everything just got dumpstered. And then in May, sometime around the same time as the engineer is getting hired, and Bill's telling me this story about ITAR, a worker who's a relative of Bill's, who obviously didn't know about this situation, called me and said, you need to come and see something. And there was a room that used to be the first aid room, but which had been turned into a junk storage closet and was filled, I'd estimate, between the stomach and the chest with boxes and junk. The room had been emptied out. They were getting ready to do a concrete regrind on the floor, and the center of it was pooled in old dry blood.
Oh,
And yeah,
that's fantastic
and
find.
my first exclamation was, oh my gosh, did someone gut a deer in here? Which, given the pigsty way in which the facility had been operated, I wouldn't have been surprised if someone did gut a deer in there. So I'd seen workplace injuries before. I'd seen a grinder accident that resulted in quite a bit of blood loss and required some immediate emergency attention. So at the time, I didn't think of it as outside the realm of, something bad happened. In hindsight, I should have thought about how it was more of a pool than splatters and spills.
Sure.
But I asked Bill, I said, do you know anything about this? I said, was there a huge injury with your metalworking operation and someone had to be rushed to the hospital. And then Bill kind of got a low voice and he grinned a little bit and he said he watched a fight. And he said it was the two shareholders of the three of the last company, that two of them got in a really big heated argument and got into a heavy fight with each other, a big fist fight. And he said one of them got really bloody, and he described it as being really bloody in the face. And he said that they both lived, and the guy with the money pulled out and they walked away. But they decided that they were done with their project here. And at the time, I had little bits of building suspicions that something is off with Bill, but I still was, I mean, he was enjoying the good recommendations of virtually all of my lenders, as well as city and state officials. And so he described this interaction. I later find out that the two people that are alleged to have had the fight, one was 80 and one was 53, and they treated each other like father and son.
Wow.
And so there were three shareholders to that project. One is afraid of the FBI. One has acknowledged that, like me, he felt pressure to leave the area. And the other one I have not been able to personally speak to, despite many efforts to do so. So I've attempted to through a grandson and through the two former business partners, and I've never been put directly in touch with him.
Incredible backstory to the building.
Without a doubt. And all of that was going on without your knowledge.
Well, and some of that before he was even there.
Exactly. Well before you were there.
Yeah, the second company.
Exactly.
Well before. The building basically turned into the unofficial community center of Dunseith, where anybody could bring what they wanted. I think there's a picture that was shown on another, either at the press conference or somewhere else, where there's an ambulance that's in there. Everything flowed through this building, and it's massive. It's 100,000 square feet. I think that's important for listeners to remember.
Broken up into many rooms. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't just an open bay 100,000 square foot building. It had like probably 13 different sections.
Wow.
So
easy to hide stuff.
Filled with maintenance rooms.
Right. So just a massive mess of 100,000 square feet that's segmented into 13 rooms. Like, it's going to be pretty easy to move things around in a place like that. So do we feel, and if there's more questions that need to be asked, but do we feel like that builds a pretty good base of where we're at in 2022?
I think largely. Charles, is there anything else you want to add to kind of wrap all that together?
Yeah, so those were the concerning things. And then once the new person joined, we all had suspicions that Bill's sabotaging the operation for some reason, because we're not getting workers. He's only doing 10% of his deliverables. The new guy does 80% with his crew. And we know something's off. And then the security contractor abandons the project after completely stripping the building of all security systems and never comes back. Which was through Bill, and Bill just says, I don't know, and then says he'll fix the security system himself. Okay. So Bill spends 3 weeks installing a security system which is deeply compromised. So your phone apps say everything is live and everything's working, but he can pass through about 70% of the building in 3 exterior doors undetected. Even though you can arm and disarm the system's sensors, the sensors don't know that they're still disarmed. So he was clever.
He's good at what he did.
And then in the either last day in July or first day of August, after we had told him he's fired, and went into his desk and found these checks sitting on his desk, and that's when it really got, we'll just say, kind of a cascade of a nightmare in a hurry.
Yeah, so what was the trigger point for letting Bill go?
The actual trigger point was we were having an all-hands-on-deck meeting, and Bill was surfing the internet in the cafeteria and refused to attend the meeting because he wanted to get fired.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Interesting.
At that point, there was your hand was forced. You had to do what you had to do. And
that was mid-late July, and then he said he already had a job lined up at the school. He was going to run the CT program and oversee the RV program. And
the same program that you're developing.
The same program he sabotaged afterwards. And
Yeah.
So he then told us that, can I have just labor work just so that it looks like I transitioned out? So we said, you can have labor work. And he went outside and he worked for 2 straight weeks and worked the hardest we'd ever seen him work. And we said, Bill, it would have been great if you did that
Yeah.
the whole time. And actually what he was doing was putting on a show for the community and then telling people we chased him out.
Right.
So we then, once we found the checks and then we found actual documentation that he thefted equipment off the site. And once we found that, we then notified the school that, just so you are aware, Bill had been fired. We wanted to be discreet about it. Now we found all this other stuff. And the school superintendent emailed back that it was shocking and he would wait on the investigations. And then he actually joined Bill in trying to do some retaliation against us later.
Wow.
Which Bill had control over the school board and influence over the superintendent's position.
Right. That's interesting.
Incredible.
Because it's interesting why he wanted out. Because he had deep ties to the building and deep ties to what we're about to dive into, the stuff that you discover is going on with the double addresses and the
all the mail that starts showing up.
And all that stuff.
I think he realized that he wasn't going to be able to continue to do what he did under us.
Right.
I will say that the armored group had actually been approached by officials and by Bill and requested to do rocket circuits. I said, do you know what they did? And he said, well, I'm pretty sure it was for rockets. And he described multiple customers paying lucratively. So no one ever made that approach to me because I think they realized very quickly I wasn't going to be interested in that approach.
Yeah.
And then I think for Bill, it was, how do we detach him from the facility? So one of his next maneuvers was he had a friend with a landfill company block our loading dock, our primary dock, where we had piled up about 7,000 square feet of scrap about 8 or 10 feet high, and the dock was blocked for 2 months.
Wow.
So, we knew he was not wanting the operation. We couldn't figure out why, and for the longest time, we thought he just couldn't, emotionally detach from the facility, but we quickly found out it was a lot more than that.
All right. You ready to dive into that, Kyler?
Go for it. I'll let you start.
Well, let me start.
I'll let you start.
All right.
Where do you want to start?
Sounds good. So, basically, what was it? This is where I want to start. We're on the subject of Bill Tuttle. What was it that Bill Tuttle was running through that company, through that building, not that company, through that facility all during that time? I think I've heard that even when the armored car vehicle company was there, that he was trying to get people in the back of the building doing another operation or something like that too. Mm-hmm. What was it that, or from your investigation, again, you just want to build RVs. You're nothing more than that. You just want to build RVs. But from your investigation, what is it that Bill was doing?
So in the aerospace and defense industry for electronics, the location of work, once qualified, unless it's re-qualified and reapproved elsewhere, it can't be moved. It appeared that Bill was trying to maintain some rework and repair stations attached to our address after 2015.
Interesting.
The manner in which that was done, we saw a contract he wrote out to Lockheed Martin where he wrote in the contract that Chiptronics was always a sales company, but it's taking over the benchmark manufacturing environment and is going to be continuing that environment. He did, in fact, do Lockheed work for about all the way until at least 2018. We found records, and we even found a city minutes report mentioning battery packs, which was a Lockheed project. He did a lot of work on the Honeywell ring laser gyro, the GG1320 sensor, which is one of your most critical sensors in Western aerospace. The software that's attached to that gyro is rated with a catastrophic flight rating by the FAA, which means failure can cause a crash. And that sensor is also extensively used by government. It controls about 80% of Western aerospace and flight critical automated functions. He was basically, according to the records, doing numerous processes, particularly with the GG1320 program. And it was coming back to him off the books. There were specific work instructions that originated from Benchmark that said no banned transactions necessary. and BAN was an aerospace audit ledger that Benchmark used to trace its aerospace work. So even across state lines, things were arriving to Bill without trace,
Sure.
and then Bill was shipping it back without trace.
Wow.
So it appeared that once they started this, they could never stop. And it appeared that part of the departure of the armored vehicle group in 2019 was that they took a long-term lease with an option to purchase, and they prepaid about 9 months or more in advance,
Sure.
maybe almost a year. The group filed a registration with the Department of Defense called DLA Cage, and their registration would have been a much lower sensitivity level than what Benchmark's registration was. And we later found out that Benchmark had an active registration, which they had even updated in either 2020 or 21, called Benchmark Electronics Dunseith site. And they did not obsolete that until around November of 2023
Oh, wow.
in winding up our litigation with them. But typically, from what I've read under defense regulations called DFARS, they are supposed to review conflicts like that. And within a couple of weeks of that armored group filing their registration is when they disappeared and were never seen or heard from again. So my belief is that the site got reviewed. There's some loose correlative evidence, which is that Honeywell took a $13 million penalty for unauthorized sales to China, among other things, of sensitive military technology in early 2021, which were for predated violations that were over the same time period as when Bill was running the Chiptronics operation, and we did find record of sales to China. So it could have been a different operation that Honeywell took that penalty from, but certainly a series of interesting correlations and connections that we've dug up.
Absolutely.
Once we bought the site, it just seems like either the gravy train was too good or what they had started could never be stopped, because then Benchmark would have to explain why a repair process is needing to be opened up in its other facility. And then the question would be asked, well, where were the repairs taking place?
Yep.
And then that opens up a multi-year investigation to start looking into what happened. And I don't think anybody wanted to touch it, because I think that the way the government dealt with the situation in 2019 was how they tried to deal with us as well. And a federal agent did speculate to me last fall, saying that he thinks the government had attempted a heavy-handed cleanup at this site once before.
Wow. So, like, that's a ton of backstory, and there's tentacles.
A lot of pack in there, I know.
Yeah. There's tentacles to the story, because you have the thread that we've talked about of the things that have gone on at this company, that how it's supposed to be shut down in 2015, how you mentioned that once you have an address good to go, you really don't want to change it because it's a process. And so there's stuff that has continued to travel through this building, peeing everywhere.
And it could cost millions in that process.
Okay.
I mean, that's not it's not that it just takes a little time.
Right.
It's expensive.
Tremendous investments of money.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Makes sense. So you have all this, and then again, in 2022, you show up. I know there's a deal with Bill Tuttle that we've talked about, but you're just trying to build RVs and manufacture RVs, and you run into problems with the Commerce Department. And so I know we don't have a lot of time left, and this is most likely, to the people that are watching this is going to be a several episode series here where we're breaking down this stuff. We're going to be going through evidence. We're going to be breaking it down big time. But I think just here at the end, we should take a few moments to talk about what's happened between 2022 and today. So if you want to summarize that or go deep, whatever time allows.
Well, the main thing to note is that Bill didn't work alone. He was financially funded by, facilitated by, and overseen by a large group of local, regional, state, and federal officials, all the way up to the executive level for Burgum, people working for Senator Kramer and Hoven, as well as the acting head of the USDA for the state. That was Bill's team when he was doing these projects. The Department of Commerce was closely involved during almost that entire time. I don't know exactly when they stopped or if they stopped with Bill before selling me the building, because I'm told that there's records that have been found from Commerce that post-date the end of my records, which end around August 2019.
Okay.
So Josh Teagan and who's the Commissioner of Commerce, and Shaden Akison were really close to me when they first recruited me into the state, and I could get them on cell phone easily, talk to them. They were very excited about the project, and I honestly think they didn't have a clue what their predecessors had done before them,
Right.
or potentially what other state officials were still doing with Bill. Because in early August, they got me, on the phone. Shaden says, I'm a lawyer. They knew I didn't have outside connections, and I was trying to understand the whole situation.
Sure.
So they started linking us up with North Dakota BCI, and that's the infamous connections to Agent Zach Meyer, which first started locally. Then Shaden started liaising with Zach Meyer. Then Zach Meyer started liaising with Brejo, who was on trial for murder.
Right.
And they did a lot of cover up against us that was also dangerous and reckless at times. Then the Department of Commerce was incredibly supportive until the day we found the CAN project, which is the GG 1320 project. Until the day we found we could prove it was when they froze our loans for the first time. And then after that, it just became this series of, if you clean it up our way, we'll give you more money. If you go to media or you go out a step, we'll probably take your loans away again. And so they were very close with us. They helped select attorneys. They worked with our attorneys. They helped us with all of our federal reporting, never made any disclosures to any agents that they knew what things were. Dave Lehman actually made a statement that I believe was blatantly false to some agents, where he said he knew about this CAN project, but he didn't know anything else that he could share. And he thought it was a commercial project. And then almost a year after that, about 11 months, once I found records that showed that Dave knew exactly what he was doing, he told me it was his first defense project. And what do you really know about qualifications, when the paperwork actually shows that officials knew they weren't qualified? So it's potentially a multi-billion-dollar catastrophe on government contracting and commercial contracting fraud. And then you have a potential flight safety risk. And then you have our company, which was still trying to build its RV business while also being forced to lock and hold parts, which are a terrorism crime with a minimum 25-year prison sentence, even for a U.S. citizen. And federal agencies were giving us instructions to hold, but not coming to clean it up. And one by one, they would boot us from one agency to another, while another agency would come in and threaten us. And it was just a mess for a while.
Just a continuation of kicking that can down the road, because no one seemed to want to have to deal with it.
No one wanted to open it, because once they open it, it's one of probably the worst aerospace fraud schemes in history.
And that basically forced your hand, where you had to go and take lead on it. It is basically
As
what
a
I gather.
property owner,
Right.
we can be liable for the crimes if we don't get ourselves asserted as a victim and a witness. And so we had to do that. And then at the point that we found that Commerce was directly associated with what we were reporting was when they began full-blown retaliation and sabotage against our business.
I want to ask this, as I know we only have a couple minutes left.
Sure.
It seems like the comments that I've heard revolve around, the public comments I've heard by state officials and others, is credibility. So rather than attacking I guess, if going down the line that, it's not credible. So instead of attacking the claims that have been made, they attack the credibility of the Gateway Pundit. They attack the credibility of Charles Hoefer, and they attack the credibility of people that get involved in the project somehow, coming to your defense. And I think I just want to give you an opportunity. I mean, you don't need to speak for the Gateway pundit. They can defend themselves. But speak to those claims, those that come against you and those that are involved, of the lack of credibility that they have. Is that true, or what do you have to say about that?
I mean, I would say answer one piece of evidence that we've shared. We've been releasing through the press conference and different podcasts, we've been releasing evidence,
Yep.
18 exhibits in the press conference specific to discoveries. We've released a backdated notary that Commerce tried to force us to sign in order for them to basically steal the building out from under us and our other lenders so that they could default the project and walk away from us, with a backdated ownership, presumably so that they wouldn't have to address the address violations and fraud with the government. There's a gag order that the Attorney General tried to slip me into signing, which covered the whole state of North Dakota, which we've shared. There's very specific evidence relating to the site. And credibility-wise, I've led off with my entire background. It's if they want to say groups like the Gateway Pundit aren't credible, Gateway has its style of reporting. I don't get to influence it,
Right.
but they have a huge national reach, and they haven't lied. No one said they've lied.
Right.
I mean,
the thing.
That's true.
Kramer hasn't denied the recordings are true, Senator Kramer, because they are. Everything is as it was, as we've presented the facts. You look at my own background. I mean, between my father and I, we've probably started over 20 projects. You're going to have giant wins and giant failures.
Right.
And that's no reason to say, that invalidates your car theft today. So it's absurd that those are the angles they're trying to do when we've already been put through a torturous nightmare of stalking and threats and hacking and intimidation, including at state and federal law enforcement levels inside North Dakota. And they would simply prefer to add to that distress and nightmare instead of trying to help us work past it. I find it appalling.
Absolutely.
Undoubtedly. And unfortunately, because we had some time constraints this morning, that's so much of what we're going to have to be able to get into on our next podcast with you, Charles. But thank you so much for sharing what you have been able to today.
Appreciate it. And I really thank you guys for taking the time and giving us a voice in this, and for being willing to do detailed segments where you're going to look at the evidence. That is what we tell people is come see the evidence.
Right.
You have it all.
Want to believe what they say? See the evidence.
Yep.
And then ask them for anything contrary. They can't show anything contrary.
Absolutely. So the next episode we are going to be working on will tell a little bit more, piece together a little bit more of the story from 22 to present, 2022 to present, and start showing off the evidence. There's a lot of it that we've been going through, and I'm sure there's even more, and that's going to be one of the key things to build the story. Yeah, you're saying there's plenty more than what we've seen. So we look forward to that. We will let you know. Just stay tuned. Follow us on Facebook, like and subscribe on YouTube. We will be announcing when the next episode will come out here very soon. But again, thank you for joining us today, Charles.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Kyler.
Thank you.